Part of the reason why the Shrek franchise has stayed relevant for over a decade since the last main installment, I think comes down to the character dynamics. Almost every character in this series has a ton of personality, and seeing how they interact makes for some of the best comedic and even dramatic writing and acting that you'll find in a movie. That raises the question, though, on which character pairings work particularly well. Your natural instinct is probably to point to Shrek and Fiona, since that's the relationship the franchise revolves around. But it's easy to forget that over the course of the 4 movies, Shrek and Fiona don't spend as much time together as you might think. The first movie, Fiona doesn't show up until halfway through. The second, they spend the latter half apart.
Dad, have you seen Shrek?
No, I haven't yet.
The third, they barely interact, although the characters Shrek does spend the movie with don't fare much better.
Ugh, kill it!
And the fourth movie, I mean, she's there, but she's pretty much a different character. She's basically just Gamora from Guardians Volume 3. That doesn't mean that their relationship isn't important or well developed, but the fact that they spend so much of the movies apart, that does mean that they need someone to fill up the remaining time. Luckily, whenever that little hurdle comes up in the writer's room, they have a solution ready to go.
Shrek and Donkey on another whirlwind adventure!
By the way, when I went looking for a clip of that line, the first thing that came up in my search results was this. I have no idea why it's titled that. Still, Donkey plays a pretty big role in Shrek's adventures, so let's take a look at the first movie and see why they work so well together. So the first time we see Donkey is actually a fairly good way of introducing how he and Shrek compare with each other. They're both fairy tale creatures in a kingdom where they're not particularly welcome.
You and the rest of that fairy tale trash poisoning my perfect world.
But while Shrek is feared enough to not be at any significant risk, Donkey doesn't have that going for him.
Seize him!
So when Donkey runs into Shrek, he immediately turns to him for help. Well, almost immediately. Something that I never see anyone talk about is this moment where we see Donkey's very first impression of Shrek. He doesn't just assume that Shrek will help him. For a split second, he's thinking, ah, help, run, a big, stupid, ugly ogre. It's only after he realizes that Shrek is the only chance he's got that he decides to take it.
I am authorized to place you both under arrest.
You in what army?
And that's when Donkey's attitude changes. He came across an ogre, which the world around him has taught him to fear, and then sees that that ogre is just as persecuted as him and is able to resolve his problems without resorting to the violence he's supposedly capable of. And from then on, he trusts Shrek, even if he's not great at taking the hint to leave him alone. And for Shrek, the fact that Donkey isn't scared of him seems to be a pleasant surprise for him.
I'm an ogre! Doesn't that bother you?
Nope.
Really?
Really.
He's clearly unaccustomed to someone who doesn't want him dead, and therefore someone who he doesn't need to be hostile towards. So while he may not necessarily like Donkey in this moment, he seems to appreciate the opportunity to have a friendly interaction, even if he is a little dumbfounded by it.
What's your name?
Shrek.
Cut to Shrek going to confront Lord Farquaad and being forced to take Donkey with him. This is where we see Shrek start to open up emotionally. He starts to let his sense of humor show a bit.
That must be Lord Farquaad's castle. Do you think maybe he's compensating for something?
And we get to see our first instance of them working as a team fighting off Lord Farquaad's guards. This leads to them both heading off on an adventure together to rescue Fiona at Lord Farquaad's request. We can take a few things from Shrek and Donkey going on this quest together. For one thing, it's the first instance of someone actually caring about Shrek's well-being, with Donkey pointing out that he shouldn't need to go on this quest in the first place.
You're gonna go fight a dragon and rescue a princess just so Farquaad to give you back a swamp, which you only don't have because he filled it full of freaks in the first place. Is that about right?
And while Shrek is begrudgingly taking Donkey along, the fact that he's taking him at all arguably implies that he's starting to appreciate him. Think about it. While Donkey hasn't been great at reading the room with Shrek, he's only ever stuck around with permission. He asked Shrek if he could stay the night at his swamp, and even accepted when told that indoors was off limits, even if he was disappointed.
I'm all alone.
And then Donkey only came along to do Locke because Shrek needed directions. When going after Fiona though, Shrek seems to know where he's going. By all accounts, he could very easily just turn to Donkey and say, "Bye bye, see you later." Now, the fact that he doesn't do that could be interpreted any way you like, but I like to think that he turned to Donkey and thought, well, he's been able to help me so far, and I need all the help I can get. It's this scene where we also get a good example of why Donkey is a good companion for Shrek to vent his frustrations to. Remember that Donkey was initially a little scared of Shrek, so clearly he still has his own presumptions about ogres.
Why don't you just pull some of that ogre stuff on him? You know, throttle him, lay siege to his fortress.
But at the same time, he's still open-minded, which means Shrek finally has someone who he can discuss his actual personality with.
For your information, there's a lot more to ogres than people think.
It doesn't go well, but it's a start. Hey guys, check out my Patreon for access to these exclusives, link in the description below. Throughout the next portion of the movie, the focus on Shrek and Donkey's relationship kinda starts to fade out as Fiona gets introduced. But Donkey is still given a few good scenes and still plays a crucial role in both their journeys. For one thing, this is the point where Shrek has had time to get used to him, and that's important because Fiona really does not care for Shrek at first.
But I have to be rescued by my true love. Not by some ogre and his pet.
The fact that Shrek and Donkey seem to be on relatively good terms is great because not only is it good character development, but it also keeps this group interesting and pleasant to be around. If Shrek was still berating Donkey while Fiona was berating him, it would likely start to feel redundant. Not to mention, it would probably get a little exhausting to be stuck with characters who are miserable around each other. I think it works a little better that anytime Shrek and Fiona get frustrated with each other, he and Donkey can just crack jokes amongst themselves to lighten the mood. This eventually leads us to one of the best scenes in the movie, the campfire scene. I touched upon this in a YouTube short a few months back, but this scene works great as a bonding moment between Shrek and Donkey. The scene opens with the two looking up at the stars as Shrek talks about how they supposedly recount the legends of famous ogres.
And that one, that's Throwback. The only ogre to ever spit over 3 wheat fields.
Donkey doesn't seem to be buying it though, claiming that the stars are
Nothing but a bunch of little dots.
The scene progresses with Donkey finally convincing Shrek to talk about his feelings on the world and how nobody considers him worthy or even capable of love simply because he's an ogre. And all of that right after Shrek defends the stories and the stars by saying,
Sometimes things are more than they appear.
And Donkey, now that he's learned just how unhappy his newfound friend actually is, finally comes to realize what he meant by ogres have layers. And by extension, it also makes him wonder what else he wasn't giving enough credit. And so to start learning, and also to show Shrek that he's not as alone as he thinks he is, he takes another look at the stars and asks him,
So, are there any donkeys up there?
and the scene ends with them discussing it. The next day passes with Shrek and Donkey's friendship again getting put in the back burner to make room for Shrek and Fiona's relationship, with the two of them even bonding over finding a way to get rid of Donkey for a few minutes.
Run into the woods and find me a blue flower with red thorns.
Blue flower, red thorns. Okay, I'm on it. Red
What are the flowers for?
For getting rid of Donkey.
But he does eventually impact their arcs in a very major way. His next big interaction with Shrek comes just after a tender moment with Fiona where he almost shoots his shot with her but chickens out at the last second.
I was wondering, are you gonna eat that? It's tender!
And Donkey, realizing what's just happened, encourages Shrek to go make a move, which he's very reluctant to do, as evidenced by him making a not very convincing excuse to end the conversation.
Hey, where you going?
To get more firewood.
And moments like this are when we see Donkey at his most thoughtful. Throughout the movie, he's generally been a little too extroverted for his own good, not really taking hints that people around him might just want to be left alone or just for him to shut up. But at this moment, when Shrek goes off to take time for himself and work up the courage to tell Fiona how he feels, Donkey backs off. He's overbearing, but he's not oblivious. And that even extends to his conversation with Fiona right after. He goes to see her late at night, only to find that she's turned into an ogre. Initially, he's his usual overly talkative self.
Was it something that you ate? Because I told Shrek those rats was a bad idea. You are what you eat, I said. Now,
No.
But after seeing how overwhelmed and upset Fiona is, he settles down, properly hears her out, and tries to help. It's here where we learn that Fiona's desire to marry Farquaad isn't due to any actual interest in him, but more just because she's ashamed of her ogre form and needs true love's kiss to get rid of it.
I'm a princess. And this is not how a princess is meant to look.
And Donkey, considering the last few days of bonding with Shrek and Fiona, gently nudges her with a suggestion that might make her feel better.
You're kind of an ogre, and Shrek, well, you got a lot in common.
Clearly he realizes that Fiona marrying Farquaad wouldn't make her happy. She would still feel the shame of the form she used to take by keeping it a secret, and would be married to someone who she's only using as a means to an end. Shrek, on the other hand, is someone who Fiona seems to genuinely like, who evidently likes her back, and as it turns out, has the same insecurities as her. If they got together, not only would it solve both their problems of not thinking they deserve to be loved, but might also get them both to a point where the things they hate about themselves don't bother them anymore. But again, he doesn't force Fiona to do anything. He just puts the thought in her head and encourages her to mull it over.
I won't tell him, but you should.
It takes a bit of time for anything to come of this, mainly due to a contrived and cliché misunderstanding, but after a while, Shrek finally built up his confidence and he and Fiona professed their love for each other. And they would have never had the courage or the wisdom to do that had it not been for one noble steed.
Really?
Really?
The last thing I want to talk about is the relatively recent announcement of a Donkey spin-off movie set to come out sometime after Shrek 5.
There's a Donkey. Donkey's gonna have his own movie. We're gonna do a Donkey as well. So we're gonna do a Shrek and we're doing a Donkey.
Now, obviously I can't speak for the quality of a movie that hasn't come out yet and that I haven't seen. What I will say is that I'm struggling to see where this story could go. Like, from movie 1 all the way to movie 4, Donkey has never developed that much as a character. There's some very slight character growth in certain scenes, as previously discussed, but he's never been a fundamentally different person by the end of a story. And that's because he's never really needed to be for the stories he's been in. He's always been the confident, extroverted character who's comfortable expressing who he is, to contrast with Shrek's more closed off and insecure personality. I'm not saying you couldn't tell a good story with him on his own. I mean, after all, Puss in Boots was a character who didn't get much development in the main series, and he went on to have one of the best pieces of spin-off media ever made. But let's also remember that he also had a pretty forgettable spin-off before that. Is that a contradictory sentence? Yes, what of it? But we'll just have to hope that the movie we get takes this character in a worthwhile direction. And also that they don't use the model from the new DreamWorks logo. My point is, though, whether or not Donkey can prove himself as a main character, he's designed to work as part of a duo, and he does that brilliantly. I mean, after all, you can't have your onion without your parfait. Oh. Well, that one as well as could be expected, I suppose. Oh, and also, I didn't have any onions or parfait. I couldn't find any, so this was the best I could do. And boy, was it not worth it. Video's over. Bye. Special shout out to my Patreon supporters, Heather Reed and Selda. Thank you so much for the support.